Well, the Biden administration has hit the pause button on the Trump team's arms sales to the UAE and Saudi Arabia, at least for now. Dan Murphy joins us now from Dubai with more on this. Now, Dan, we knew this was going to come up, but does it strike you as potentially a real problem at this point, or is this the new president just playing to his base?
Well, it's interesting, isn't it, Hadley? Because clearly US foreign policy is under new management, and Biden could be looking to flex some muscle here. So what we've now learned is that the United States will essentially be reviewing billions of dollars in weapon sales to the UAE and Saudi Arabia that were approved by the former president, Donald Trump. Now, this review includes the sale of those precision-guided munitions to Saudi Arabia, as well as the $23 billion deal to sell F-35 fighter jets and drones to the UAE. Now, these weapon sales were approved as part of the Abraham Accords, which of course prompted the Emirates to establish diplomatic ties with Israel for the first time. This F-35 sale, of course, predates that agreement, though, so the UAE probably pretty disappointed. Now, remember, though, the review doesn't mean that the sale won't go ahead, but it clearly shows that Biden is really seeking to recalibrate the US relationship with the Middle East and, of course, fulfill a campaign promise to take a tougher stance against Saudi Arabia. Washington very keen to ensure that American weapons aren't being used to further the Saudi-led war in Yemen, and also seeking to perhaps regain some leverage here as well for a looming negotiation over the Iran nuclear deal. Now, the UAE embassy in Washington was out with a statement saying it welcomes this renewed regional dialogue and says it will work with Biden on Middle East peace and stability. It added, as in previous administrations, the UAE anticipated a review of current policies. Now, of course, the UAE believes that these weapons are critical in deterring aggression in the region and will reassure regional partners. But one would assume, Hadley, that this is also a play by the United States to regain some leverage here, and it certainly disrupts foreign policy across the Middle East as Biden looks to recalibrate this relationship with Saudi Arabia as well.
Bradley Bowman is the senior director for the Center on Military and Political Power of FTD, and he joins us now from Washington. It's great to have you on the program, Bradley. Thanks so much for sticking with us so late into your evening. I mean, what is this all about? At the end of the day, you've got to sit back and think about this. You know, the UAE came on board for the Abraham Accords, and then the entire GCC decided it's time for a rapprochement. All of this down to the wire, right ahead of the Biden administration taking office. And now the Biden administration has said, okay, let's, dial all of this back in terms of these arms sales. And this is at a time, frankly, when tensions are high in this part of the world. And even General McKenzie was out here scoping new areas in Saudi Arabia in which to potentially position U.S. forces if they were needed. What's this all about?
No, thanks for the opportunity to join you. It's a real pleasure. As new Secretary of State Antony Blinken said today, and as spokesman at the State Department as well, it's fairly routine when a new administration comes in to hit the pause button, if you will, on arms sales, particularly ones that were decided in the last few months of the previous administration, just to make an assessment whether those arms sales are consistent with U.S. principles, U.S. interests, and U.S. laws. And so on some level, that's what we see here. And that's reasonable, I think, to most people. On the other hand, I don't think it would be accurate to say that all is the same here. I think you're going to see more scrutiny applied, particularly to Saudi Arabia, but also to the UAE in terms of arms sales. But I also was encouraged to see Secretary Blinken say that, what is true, and that is that the Abraham Accords were a historic and positive agreement. It's in the interest of the United States to demonstrate to UAE and Bahrain the benefits of making peace. Peace should be its own reward, but we want to help demonstrate the benefits of making peace with Israel so that they can in turn demonstrate those benefits to their own people, and that other countries that are looking on wondering whether they should take the same step with Israel, deciding whether it's in their interest to do so. And more broadly, right, the common threat in the region from an Israeli, an Emirati, and an American perspective is the Islamic Republic of Iran. The Abraham Accords help us move toward a more unified diplomatic coalition to push back on their aggression, and also makes that coalition more militarily capable if we carry this forward.
That's the point, isn't it, Bradley? Because at the end of the day, I mean, none of this would have happened, presumably, without, the AOK from the Israelis, that they were comfortable with F-35s going to the UAE and more arms sales, being made to Saudi Arabia. So at the end of the day, what is the signal that this sends to Iran?
I think Iran should be scared as heck with the idea of a unified Israeli Arab American coalition pushing back on their aggression. And I think we need to move in that direction. But, I'm a fan of providing our Emirati partners the means they need to defend themselves and be more effective members of the coalition. But there's some balancing things to balance here from an American perspective. We don't want this most advanced fighter in the world and the technologies associated with it to be leaking to Beijing or Moscow, number one. And number two, both as a matter of American principle and law, we have to make sure that we guard Israel's qualitative military edge. So I think this will be managed. I think robust arms sales will continue to the UAE. We'll have to watch the F-35 closely, but I think Saudi Arabia is in for some real tough sledding, particularly because of their activities in Yemen.
Bradley, as a result, do you see any possibility that the terms of this sale might change or might not go ahead at all?
You know, I think reversing the sales would send a very unfortunate message to UAE and Bahrain. And like I said earlier, others will be watching, and that could inform their decision making. So I think it is in America's interest to demonstrate those benefits. And not all benefits need to be in the security sector, right? There are commercial and civilian benefits, tourism, trade, agriculture, and all that. But no doubt, I mean, when you've got the Islamic Republic of Iran sitting across the Gulf from you, security is a top priority. And the UAE has wanted the F-35 for a long, long time. And they think as a result of making peace that they're in a good position to get it. So they're being patient. The Emirati ambassador to the U.S. is saying the right things. But if this drags on, I could see some agitation building in Abu Dhabi.
Let's see what happens next. Bradley Bowman, we're going to have to leave it there. Thanks so much for joining us.